Welcome to the Med Pavilion at the COP27. We're very pleased to be part of this effort, and we're very pleased to have the opportunity to discuss the social impact of climate change in the Euromed region with the experts who've very kindly agreed to join us today. I think if I were to give a headline to this panel, it would be the figure released by the UNHCR that says that since 2008, 21.5 million people have been forcibly displaced every year by weather-related events such as floods, storms, wildfires, and extreme temperatures. We hear a great deal about climate change itself, how it's affected our planet, but of course it's a cycle. Climate change affects people, and measures taken to respond to climate change in turn depend on people to be successful. Now, the first step in working toward offsetting the effects of climate change is to understand the role of people as victims of climate change effects, but also as agents of action. Climate change affects the most vulnerable, creating greater inequalities within and between our societies, inequalities that, one way or another, affect us all. We all need to be aware of them, and it's only if we all work together that we'll be able to find solutions. And we hear that time and time again, but once humanity accepts this reality, individuals will realize that their societal actions are effectively environmental actions, and there is a need to embed society in climate change policies. I'll quickly be going through a few facts regarding the direct and indirect impact of climate change on societies, and then we can take a look at how these can be addressed and ask our panel of experts how the tools that we have as international organizations and NGOs can counter this impact. The Mediterranean is today the first tourist destination in the world. But it is also a climate change hotspot with increases in temperature that are 20% higher than anywhere in the world. Now, a report by the European Institute of the Mediterranean says that climate change, biodiversity loss, and diverse forms of resource degradation all intersect to affect the ecologies and the economic, political, and social fabric of the Mediterranean societies. So the three key areas directly affected are agriculture, food, and water, all of course directly linked to human survival. Food shortages, water shortages, and issues with the quality of nutrition in turn lead to health issues, forcing people to migrate, literally in search of better pastures. Not to mention that it also leads to loss of cultural identity and other related risks. And it is always the poorest and the most vulnerable people who bear the brunt of climate change impacts, whereas they are the ones who contribute the least to the crisis. There's also the indirect impact on societies emanating from this threat. Climate change is intimately linked to patterns of inequality around the world, which lead to social tensions and potentially to social unrest. We also see this in places where conflict has either been triggered or exacerbated by the effects of climate change, such as drought or lack of enough natural resources for everyone. Look at Syria, for example. It's an example of how desertification led to an unprecedented poverty in some areas, leaving the poorest vulnerable, as they would be anywhere else, to radical messages. The combination of that and, of course, the demands for reform and a more dignified existence that swept through the region by the youth led to what was referred to in the end as the world's worst refugee crisis in decades. The UNHCR says that 95% of all conflict displacements in 2020 occurred in countries vulnerable to highly vulnerable to climate change. So, what can we, proponents of intercultural dialogue, do to counter the impact of climate change within our societies in the Euromed region? We know, of course, that solutions can never be individual or countrywide. In our region, a pan-Mediterranean approach is needed. And we also know that there is a cultural element involved, shifting our culture from rights to land to responsibility for land, to mitigate the impact of climate change, for example. The Anna Lindh Foundation was created to change, through the role played by civil societies on both shores of the Mediterranean, some of the realities that our region faces by promoting intercultural dialogue. It's an enterprise that today demands more varied and innovative solutions, most of which we believe can be found within the network of 4,500 NGOs that are under our umbrella. Indeed, the ALF is a platform which aims to bridge the gap between institutions and civil society. Our work focuses on activities that support dialogue and mutual understanding through common projects established between youth and civil society actors from the 41 countries to the south and north of the Mediterranean. Building up to the COP27, the ALF has worked with the Egyptian civil society organizations, which are ALF members, to raise awareness. With us here is Medna Shalash. She's the head of the Egyptian ALF network, and we'd love for her to tell us more about that. Please.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Princess Reem, for giving me the floor, and I want to welcome to Your Excellency Ambassador Berger here in our pavilion. I'm so happy to be here and Anna Foundation here in this COP, because COP is very important and it's a host in Egypt. The National Egyptian Network, we are working together to implement some of activities to raise awareness about the climate change. It's very important in Egypt and in Egyptian network to share our perspectives and our values to the other networks. And also we are working with Anna Foundation through the campaign which launched last June, and we implemented some of workshops. These workshops is aimed to promote what the meaning of the climate change, promote the meaning of how we can protect ourselves from the climate change as civil society organizations. I wanted to also to talking about our project we implement in Anna Foundation. It was also supported by European Union. This project is called Intercultural Dialogue to Combat Hate Speech in Euro-Mediterranean country. This project was in partnership with the heads of the network in Spain, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Latvia. And this project is target the youth, and we receive Intercultural Achievement Award from Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Syria this year. And I met with the president of Syria and talking with him about this project. So it's very important for the Anna Foundations and from the NGOs all over the Euro-Mediterranean countries to talking about intercultural dialogue. I think intercultural dialogue is very important to put it in all topics regarding climate change, hate speech, empowering women and empowering youth. So that's our aim in Anna Foundation, and also it's our aim in Egyptian network. Thank you very much.
It's working, yeah. Can everybody hear me properly? There's a lot of noise out there. Thank you so much again, Medna. I'd like now to introduce our panel, to whom we're extremely grateful again for making the time to join us during this most important event that is the COP27. Ahmed Yassin, to my left, is the co-founder of Banlastic Egypt, a social enterprise which works on banning the single-use plastic in Egypt and the MENA region. He is both a solar ambassador for a solar city company and a part-time solar engineer here in Egypt. And Ahmed, by the way, is also an EU GIL connector. Since 2019, he's also been active as a Young Mediterranean Voices ambassador. He started the Anti-Plastic Pollution Movement initiative for the Mediterranean basin countries. Our second panelist to my right is Neringa Tumenaite. Did I say that correctly? Okay. Neringa is a trainer and consultant in the field of global solidarity partnerships and innovation. She is also a doctoral researcher at SOAS University in London and an advisor to the Mediterranean Youth Foundation. In her current role as managing director at Humanity Consulting, Neringa coordinates a global consultancy on international cooperation, climate justice, and youth policy. Then we have Rosalind Skillen, who's an environmental journalist. So I feel connected because of the journalism. She is also a COP27 youth delegate and a G7 youth delegate. She's interested in climate policy, community-led action, and environmental peace building, which also fits perfectly within what we do at the Anna Lindh Foundation. As outreach officer at Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful, she works with community groups to design climate action plans, and it's the first such initiative in Northern Ireland. And we're very fortunate to have with us as well Bidi Finzi, who is one of the founding directors of Doc Society, a non-profit film foundation with branches in Europe, East Africa, the Americas, and Australia. For 17 years, this NGO advocates and are experts in a narrative shift strategy, exploring the full potential of storytelling alongside traditional advocacy to transform societies. At Doc Society, BD works across many global initiatives, supporting transformative storytelling to advance a climate just and biodiverse future. So thank you again, all of you as well, for being with us. The first topic I'd like to jump into is sensitization and education. I mean, surely these are very important aspects when you're talking about the role that societies have to play to react to the impact on societies of climate change. And they're getting rather urgent, are they not? I mean, if people understand what is truly happening, they can act as agents of change, which needs to happen sooner rather than later. How do you think we can move toward this kind of awareness? Maybe I can start with Ahmed.
Thank you, Your Highness. Thank you very much. Thank you all for attending today. It's a very important question, to be honest, about how we can integrate the education parameter in many things regarding the awareness campaigns, or if we want to be an if you want to be an advocator, you have to have a certain language or emotional language, emotional intelligent language, and how to speak to the other people. So most of the climate activists, if you can say that 10 years ago, they have the aggression, the attacking to convince people to do something. So it has, you know, the wrong image or the negative image, to be honest. But now we've changed a little bit the language to have a more inclusivity to most of the, you know, clusters of the community to be part of the equation. So, for example, I want to rely on a great example happened in Alexandria in the western part, which we went to the national schools along with the, you know, the Ministry of Education gave us an access to some schools that they didn't have really an access to educational or environmental educational program that wasn't really clear enough to learn or to be even to give the students the proper type of awareness and to understand what's going on regarding the environment, for example, and the climate change. We had a massive responses. We've created a program that gives the opportunity to the students to be part of being a climate activists, and they just, had 2 or 3 sessions. So it's about, you know, opportunity. I've been discussing with you yesterday, and how can youth can be part, a vital part, if they have the chance, opportunity, or the access to such thing. We found out that the climate change as a part or an issue that which is happening, of course, or the climate crisis, is a very dependent thing on the educational parameter to support the idea itself. We cannot really work in a single way, or we have to have a multilateral ways, different methodologies and strategies to give the opportunity to raise the awareness in the proper way. Most of the people that I have to say is depending on very few type of information, very difficult or, you know, complicated. Sometimes the journalists are helping in that to simplify or to digest the info, which should be important. For example, Belastic have done a great thing about translating most of the content to be in Arabic. Because sometimes people, they want to understand what is the problem, for example, in the plastic pollution in Egypt or in the Mediterranean, Alexandria is on a specific basis, but it's always, you know, a very, you know, complicated reports. This is how it goes, how you can change or shift your strategy to give the people then access to understand what is the content that you have to work on. And last, that what I want to say is we have a new and great thing called social media. It could be used in the favor of, giving a sort of great awareness regarding the climate change, but in a very, very, specifically to the groups, younger people who are very, very good and amplify the signal of the problem. So, yes.
Thank you, Ahmed. Sorry, I took my phone because I'm looking at the time. That's a very good point, and I think we're looking at, I was particularly interested in your point about languages, because of course you can't have that kind of exchange and awareness if everybody doesn't share that same knowledge. Neringa, maybe you have something to add about that.
Yes, I think it was a wonderful question, and firstly, thank you for having me here, and it's great to see such interest in the voices also of young people who work on the Mediterranean. I've volunteered over 10 years with the Erasmus Plus program and hosting global forums with young people in MENA, Europe, and Asia. And we developed constantly policy recommendations exactly on the question you have asked. And here I have two conclusions that came up from it. So one was that often young people have the sensibility and knowledge and willingness to act, but they do not have resources. Or access to the policy making rooms, even when they are equipped and at times maybe even more aware than the policymakers themselves, if I dare so say. So one thing I would like to advocate for is meaningful youth participation. So not just tokenism or having a young person to take a picture with, but actually listening and including their opinions in the policies that we're making. And second point that is very important in terms of awareness raising and education is access to funding to support peer-to-peer education and non-formal education especially. And I know that Anna Lindh has been doing an amazing job in this area, also European Union through Erasmus Plus program, but there are still many NGOs, especially grassroots initiatives, in MENA in particular, who cannot access this funding, and often because of the quite wild bureaucratic requirements. So these are some of the areas we need to look into.
That's actually extremely important, and of course we're in one of those events. I mean, and one of the main, I would say, goals of these events is to bring young people together and civil society together with institutions and decision makers. So here's hoping that this message will also be heard loud and clear. And the call for funding, which is, I think we need to repeat it all the time. Rosalind, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I guess when we're thinking about environmental education, as a journalist, I'm really interested in how to bridge the gap between knowledge and action, because a lot of the time people actually do have the knowledge of the climate science. It's been around for so long, but people aren't acting. And what's the reason for that? So I guess when we're looking at environmental education in schools, for example, I think what's really important is enabling more like participatory modes of learning. So like school councils, eco clubs, different ways that people can actually knowledge transfer, create the conditions for skills development, but also practical ways for people to implement what they've learned. And another thing I think which is important when it comes to environmental education is mainstreaming the environment across different subjects. So a lot of the time we think of the environment as it relates to science, geography, biology, but looking at the creative and cultural sector and how people can bring skills, different skills in different ways, and that's still relevant to the climate movement. And around here it's been really cool to see like different expressions of art and music and culture, and I think that also plays a crucial role when it comes to environmental education. But then if we're moving out of schools, so for example, I work with community groups, really locally led across Ireland, and we don't only teach them about climate change science, climate policy, and how to implement like behavioural change, but also we work with them to do climate action plans and mitigation plans. So it's coupling the knowledge with the action so that they're able to think about what they've learned and then how it relates to their local community as they come up with a locally designed climate action plan. So yeah, those are some of the things that I would think about upon reflecting on this.
Sorry. Sometimes I'll be waving my hands. It's not to stop you, it's because there's a fly. No pressure. But thank you. Yeah, thank you. It's been here since, yeah, it's not just following me. Okay, good. No, thank you for that's actually also very, I love the idea also of bridging between knowledge and action. And giving, it goes back to what you're saying, I mean, giving the youth actually do have the knowledge, they do have the awareness, it's just giving them the means and the opportunity to really push their ideas forward and turn them into concrete actions. Bidi, I'd love to hear what you have to say, especially in the view, because what you do is about raising awareness, right? But in a very different and original way, if I may say.
Well, contributing at least. Listening to you all, I was thinking forgive me, I'm going to butcher this quote, but the great philosopher and writer Amitav Ghosh, in The Great Derangement, there was a beautiful line which essentially says, "It is not the job of the bureaucrats and the politicians to paint the future. That is the job of the artists and the writers and the poets." And I guess my proposition to this wonderful panel is that we have a whole untapped lever that we have yet to deploy, and that is cultural strategy. Everyone here at COP is familiar with, obviously, it all stems down from the scientific facts and the reports that we are landed. There is enormous investment and seriousness taken in strategic communications. There is investment in movement building, in climate movement and activism, as there is in political and legal lobbying. We are missing the heart game. We're missing the heart game. We're missing a cultural strategy which has the chance to engage mass publics, not just nationally but regionally. And the joke is on us, because the fossil fuel industry know this. They invest nearly $1 billion a year on their stories, on their perspective, on their narratives. And meanwhile here we just sort of hope that maybe the marketplace or, might program the odd film or the odd series. It's not good enough, and we have such an opportunity. I don't need to tell anyone in this room the power of storytelling. We know that. We know that here, but we're not using it. We're not using all of the full power of our public service broadcaster networks, the commercial streamers, the radio station, the podcast. We need an absolute stream of the best, most engaging narratives to not only help us describe what is going on, but to help us imagine the future that we could build together, to inspire us to work together. We will never win the body politic, or our publics until we use it. But it's there to be used. And we need a sort of an audacious agreement, I think, on behalf of arts and culture to center and to prioritize the climate. And, we had a beautiful pre-conversation this meeting, and I was kind of idly saying, what if, hypothetically, the European Broadcasting Union, just to take one network, but there are many others we could think of and could join to, what if, in 2023 they agreed to commit 20% of all of their broadcasting to the climate? 20% of all of their programming turned over to stories about what is happening now and what we need to do next. And I don't mean 20% of programming which is just hardcore news or, I mean the comedies, I mean the animation, I mean the fiction, I mean the great plethora of creative storytelling that can bring it to life for us. So, I think it's good news. There's a whole kit, there's a whole lever we haven't even tried yet, and it's waiting for us.
That's a wonderful way of looking at it, and I think a very practical one as well, because it is also something that is doable, it is actionable. What is, I suppose, what I want to ask next, in view of all your interventions, so we want to raise awareness, we want to sort of bring that to the forefront, using all these different means at our disposal, and culture certainly is one untapped sector, but we need to sort of, it's really about getting buy-in, because only buy-in will lead to action. And so this is where I suppose we at the Anna Lindh Foundation need to hear from all of you as well about how do we, we're a unique organization. We work with institutions and we work with NGOs, and so we can be that bridge. How can we enhance this dialogue through culture, but through other ways as well, between governments and civil societies, to really obtain tangible results on the ground? And I think that's what because we don't have, everybody agrees, and again, I think it's all important to that, but everybody agrees we're running out of time. So what do you think?
Briefly, it's very important to understand that the intercultural dialogue really helped to solve lots of social issues, and people they do understand, for example, how the connection between the two shores of the Mediterranean, south and north, we had a very fantastic and great projects that help to make the youth voices are heard. But what about the climate change? We can use the same strategy to connect both shores together, but now in a very important issue, which is climate change. Also, not just, globally. I can talk about my beloved city, Alexandria, and the Mediterranean city, and how we've spoken with the fishermen, and we opened a dialogue to understand what is the problem exactly there. So they just mentioned and responded to our questions regarding what is exactly the problem. So we found out that climate change is not just a problem with environment and people who are talking about the luxurious terminology, but no, it's an economical problem and it's devastating their lives. And now there is a sort of a great problem related to the climate displacement regarding the fishermen in Alexandria that it will move from other places. So intercultural dialogue is a very important pillar to be, or we can say it's the derivative and the most important and strong way to enhance working on the climate change issue. And this is what I do like that Annalyn to be part of it the next upcoming years, especially with the youth who will be the main driver of this process.
Thank you, Ahmed. And I think actually, just to go back to what you were saying, I mean, take for example the fishermen, but there's a lot of communities in the entire region. They need to buy in because finding a solution to climate change, or the solutions that are sometimes offered to them to counter climate change, are solutions that sometimes are difficult economically for them. And so that's something that also they have to see some sort of benefit. And there has to be sort of, again, this intercommunication, the culture, the economy, the society. I mean, all this has to make sense to everybody. And again, it's usually the most vulnerable who pay the price, but they're not usually at fault, but they end up paying the price because decisions are made to sort of... So how do you go around that? Neringa, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Wow, it's like a 1 minute to solve $1 million question.
Something like that. Yeah. Okay, I'll be generous, 2 minutes.
Let me see. Well, just to point when it comes to youth, to supporting people at both the top level in terms of policy engagement, but also grassroots work, and I will elaborate a little bit. So at the policy work, we see that often youth are only engaged in areas kind of stereotypically thought as interesting or relevant to young people, which is education, culture, youth, and sport. And now we see sometimes climate. But we also need to involve youth in decision making on energy, transport, healthcare, etc., because we know that issues are incredibly interlinked and complex. For example, sometimes if we buy a burger outside and we're eating it, do you know that we might be contributing to Amazon forest being cut? Because one of the biggest importers of Brazilian beef, which ends up clearing the Amazon forest, are European Union, Egypt, and China. So it's not just about planting trees here, but being responsible globally. And because of the current economy and kind of neoliberal system that we're living in, we have to be aware of these very sort of critical interlinkages. And then besides mainstreaming of youth participation, I would also say grassroots support as much as possible. And also, I mean, for the young people here, that's not, engaging with institutions is not always the only way. Sometimes it costs too much for your mental health and efforts. And you can say, okay, we'll just self-organize independently without always knocking on doors and asking for funds and wanting to be admitted into meetings. So I greatly support the self-organizing too.
That's a very good point. And so I suppose that goes to pointing to the resourcefulness of the civil society and the youth groups. And yes, probably they should be involved in energy and transport and other things, because I'm sure there are a lot of innovative solutions that, we need to listen to, or we can share, depending on if I'm with the youth or if I'm. Rosalind, I'd love to hear what you think about all that.
Yeah, I guess when I was reflecting a bit about like intercultural dialogue and thinking about how culture relates to climate, it made me think a lot about the context where I grew up. So in Ireland, for example, where a lot of the would I put it, the culture and the economy is really heavily dependent on agriculture and land use. And there's a whole piece about when we're thinking about moving away towards a more like plant-based economy, and one where we're incentivizing farmers to protect the land rather than destroy it. There's a whole like cultural dialogue that comes with that, because the farmers they're custodians of our carbon and they're stewards of the land, and therefore you need to respect the fact that farming for so long has been part of their culture, their heritage and their tradition. And the example is with peatlands, which are, I don't know if people are familiar with peatlands, but a lot of the time farmers are burning them and extracting them and draining them, and it goes back to, you know, you're looking at poetry, Irish poetry of Seamus Heaney when he used to go out to the bog and cut turf for peat. So it's not as simple as some suddenly telling farmers that they can no longer cut their peatlands. There's a whole like culture, heritage, tradition piece that comes with it, and I think that then when we're thinking about climate solutions, it's really important that we take that into account, and that the solutions that we propose, we're working with communities, especially locally led communities, to design climate solutions, because I think that's a really important part of it. And without that, then we're leaving people behind, because the social inclusion and the cultural dialogue is just as important as the climate resilience piece, in my view.
Well, that's exactly the point. I mean, again, people need to make a living, and they need to make that living now, not in 5, 10, 15 years, which is what sometimes is promised. And so, you know, again, how can you use, you know, the various ways that you're suggesting in terms of advocacy and storytelling to sort of really find a way to sort of make it work for everybody, I suppose. It's at all these levels, you know. I mean, of course, there has to be something that gives for people to want to make that change. Organic farming is expensive. Solar energy is expensive still. Bidi.
So if I put my kind of cultural strategist hat back on for a minute, I think the thing that I reflect on one of the biggest problems about more people feeling truly connected and behind the climate movement, or part of it, or feeling included in it, is because they never saw themselves represented in it. It has been a very particular demographic. It's been a very white, global north-led movement, and the lack of, and I think it's alienated many communities who then say, well, I can't imagine myself as part of that. I don't feel I'm part of the climate movement. So I think we have to work on eradicating this. And one of the ideas, and I say this coming from, you know, a deeply divided, polarized country. The United Kingdom is, you know, it's horrendous, the kind of schisms, the fault lines, culturally, socially, demographically, that cross us. And it makes any kind of coordination or collaboration around these profound issues so hard. So I want to acknowledge that. That is the reality not just of my country, but of sadly, a number of countries. But, you know, one of the things that has given me real cheer and is actually the models of the people's assemblies. And I've been very, you know, super inspired by the Irish experiments in that too. But most recently in the United Kingdom too, you know, we held a People's Climate Assembly for the first time. And it was a tactic to bring together this unbelievably diverse and representative cross-section of British society, most of whom would never self-identify as being concerned or engaged in the climate issues or the climate emergency. And over this beautiful participatory process of education, of discussion, of having information presented and the chance to talk with one another and hear one another's perspectives, by the end of it, they had a unified set of demands for government. And I know there's the big, well, what did the government then do? Well, then Boris came in, you know, we're like, okay. But as a principle, as a mechanism, as a practical, cogent mechanism for bringing together even an incredibly fractured and dividing society and bringing, over a period of time, bringing them to a cohesive identification of the challenges and a unified response to them. It was extraordinary piece of kind of people's democracy in action. And I wonder how far, and I know people's assemblies are hopefully being planned in many other contexts, but there's something there for us really to hold on and to build off. Because I agree completely, we must have all of our voices represented, we must see ourselves as part of the movement. And that kind of participatory involved process is a clue to getting there, I think.
Actually, it's a brilliant and very concrete example of the ways things can be changed on the ground, or at least bringing people together to share ideas, to exchange ideas, but also to then end up sharing, at least a similar vision or a similar plan as to how to go forward, which I think is what we're trying to get at here. What I'd like to now lead up to our second main topic, which is precisely how you insert dialogue at the source of this sharing knowledge, and how it can lead to concrete actions, which was how you said, what you were mentioning. But then taking it that step further, harnessing that dialogue to make sure that actions are indeed collective actions within societies, or even between societies of north, south, east, west. And if we look, for example, at the climate refugee question, what kind of collaboration can we promote between countries through our civil society networks? I mean, that's a very big question, and it touches on so many different things: climate, inclusion, dialogue, culture, mutual understanding. And what kind of collaboration can we work on that promotes inclusion, respects diversity within societies, and when host countries receive climate refugees, to give that kind of example? So, Ahmed?
Yes, it's a very tricky question, to be honest, and have many answers. But the most important thing is in the equation of success of if we want to have a step further for the climate change, or especially the climate displacement, which you mentioned. I would like to echo your words about how it's a very difficult issue, is to put everyone in the equation. Everybody must be in the equation, because sometimes we've been working together. So the government is in a shutter island, communities in a shutter island, civic society in a shutter island. So the shutter island effect have been taking place for more than 20 years. I can say 27 years, maybe. So we need to really connect the three sides of the triangle to have a successful development phase. And what I've seen this time, when you have a collective measures, I can speak about projects which happened in Egypt, funded by the EU or any other institutions. It helped a lot, because the people who are living in the same place, who knows the coordinates, who knows the information is power, they've contributed in this perfectly. So it's about, we can't really talk about a national or a global actions without having the local municipalities or, the communities itself. I was really glad that I've seen many indigenous groups have been taking place in most of the dialogues today, and I even want them to be part of the negotiations starting from today or tomorrow, and it will give the right solutions to be implemented. And that's what I see. So one of the greatest things that happened with Analind or other big institutions is the intercultural dialogue, to be connecting all sides together on one table, and also to be inclusive to many groups who have been vulnerable to many problems. Maybe they don't have the proper access again, and they need to have the right, need their voices to be heard. Also to respect the culture, because most of the people understand that if I impose my vision regarding the climate change with my way, it's going to be so rigid, another rigid climate change regimes. But what we want to do is a flexible one, and a hub that withstands all the ideas and opinions, to have one vision related to the climate change. So one fact about the climate displacement, that now it's 70% more than wars caused by humans. So most of the refugees will be, the climate refugees will be more than the war zones, which is a big problem and massive one, and most of them in developed countries more than the developing countries. Of course, Africa #1 as a continent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. That's actually very enlightening. Neringa, what's your perspective?
So I have a few points I would like to address here. One is tackling inequalities, and the other one is amending the legal system. So when it comes to inequalities, building on what Bidi has mentioned. For example, in the UK, there's a very successful movement called Extinction Rebellion. It often relies on obstructing, blocking the roads, knowing that you are likely to get arrested, and it's part of the strategy. And there have been like notes raised by the people of color that if you're white, you have very different often relation to the police in the UK versus to the people of color who often experience harassment. And it's not everyone is willing to go through the strategy getting arrested. So referring to what you said, that sometimes the movements led by the global north are kind of centered in themselves and are not fully inclusive. So that's one of the things we have to work on among themselves as civic society. And because there's no addressing climate justice without acknowledging human rights. And we know that even in Egypt, protesting is allowed to some people more than others. So we as foreigners allow ourselves way more to relate to more challenging topics versus some of our local activists who then often fear prison in some cases as well. Then when it comes to the legal system, I think we need to focus more on the recognition on the climate refugees as a concept, because there are a few resolutions which refer to that, but it is not binding. And often the legal systems in our countries refer to climate migrants or economic migrants, so we do not have proper protection mechanisms. And that is not to say that when we have refugee protection mechanisms that they always work or that the countries always respect them, but that is the whole other topic. But I think definitely the legal system needs more focus on that as well, because we will be increasingly facing the challenges of climate refugees, and we have no way of supporting them fully as of now.
Rosalind, those are actually very interesting points, and I'd like to pick up in particular on the issue of inequality. And that is, I mean, I suppose it is a great obstacle in terms of common action. If we're talking about, again, even in, intercultural dialogue is supposed to bring about, a more inclusive way of doing things. But again, how do you overcome the inequalities that we're seeing on the ground?
Yeah, it's a really, really critical question. And I guess as well, coming from a media lens, what I would be concerned about is the way that the media are going to write about climate migration in the years to come, especially maybe right-wing press, maybe anticipating a rise of like eco-fascism, and I think that's really important to address. And I think then the media have such a responsibility when it comes to communicating about climate migration to do it in a way that doesn't depict victims or any like harmful stereotypes, but as agents, and like highlighting the really positive climate stories as well. I mean, there's some really beautiful ones in the context where I work in Ireland, where, for example, seeing how when refugees are welcomed, how the environmental and the peace-building agendas line up really beautifully. So one example is an organisation of women who are in the asylum system, and they all come together and collect food that would have otherwise gone to landfill, and they like ferment it using their own like cuisines and traditions and cultures back home, and it's become a social enterprise, and now they're everywhere. It's really, really good. And as well, seeing people who arrive in Ireland become involved in community gardens and allotments, and it's a way of welcoming people, and it's showing how then it builds relationships with the people who live on the island of Ireland, and then people who've just arrived, and it's a way of showing how environmental and peace building agendas line up. So climate action is promoting that peace building. It's also giving people social inclusion, cultural cohesion, community, that kind of thing. So I think in that way, looking at how climate can become an area of opportunity when it comes to welcoming people and promoting these values of peace and reconciliation and social cohesion.
Absolutely, and these are two very interesting examples that you've mentioned, Rosalind. One of them is the peace-building example, because we think of peace-building as a UN intervention in a country as at war, but that's not. It's so necessary even ahead of, upstream, ahead of that, and it's something that really can bring about so many amazing results in terms of inclusion. And interesting, you pointed out the responsibility of the media in covering migrant issues. And again, we go back to the knowledge and the training that is needed. It is a specific skill that is, that needs proper understanding and proper training. We just actually did one in Jordan at the Media Institute the UNESCO just launched their handbook as to how to report on migrants and refugees in Arabic. Again, languages are important for everybody to share that knowledge and to use that knowledge to be able to work together to similar objectives. BD, what is your perspective on that?
So it's a kind of observation, really. You know, when we work with storytellers and we're doing an analysis around a thematic like climate change storytelling or filmmaking around migrants or immigration, one of the first exercises we do is we say, this is interesting, where do you think your story sits on the following axis? If we take a horizontal axis, which is stories that are not known at all, completely new, breaking, revelatory stories and stories that the public are very, very familiar with, and a vertical axis which charts degrees of organized opposition. So how far is there really serious organized opposition even to the narrative coming out into the context? So it's fascinating. Filmmakers kind of say, oh, well, my film belongs here, my film belongs here. Well, I tell you, here's an interesting fact. The films around, the storytelling around climate change and migration are in the same bottom right-hand quadrant. And it is the hardest quadrant where there is enormous audience fatigue, enormous over-familiarity on one level with the facts as they think they know them, and an enormous amount of organized opposition. And what I mean by that, counterfactual narrative intervention. So if your story is going to come out, you can expect to receive, some severe pressure, potentially undermining of that narrative. So both of those thematics sit in the most different quadrant. And I say that as a point of humbling. We must know the complexity and the delicacy of this storytelling, and you're completely correct. It's not just any story. It's not simply a reporting of the facts. We have to think so carefully and so judiciously about the narratives we need now in any given place to be truly transformative to publics, to politics in that place. There's no kind of silver bullet story that's going to fix everything. The question is, what is needed in my area, in my region, to seriously address this issue and to engage relevant audiences? So it's that level of thinking and precision that we need, and an appetite to do it, Yeah. So I just offer that as a reflection.
Yeah. And I think, Bidi, you were mentioning also in our pre-conversation that it's not just about Hollywood. It's about every single community putting their stories out. And their stories can be universal because everybody can relate to them, but it is important that every story is told in a different way and that relates to what is important to that specific community. I'd like to now, if I may, let the audience ask questions or participate if anybody's interested or if anybody has any reactions. And there's a lot of interesting reflections that we've had thanks to you. I mean, the storytelling, the contestation, inequalities, the way in which things can be reported on better. Ahmed, yesterday also when we spoke, you mentioned something interesting, the green dialogue, which I think is always interesting. I just read this piece in the New York Times, some of you may have seen it, saying that we're reaching a tipping point. So essentially there's also not much time. What do we do? I'd love to hear from our audience. And also one of the other big questions is we're all more or less in agreement, but there is, I'll talk about something that's a very delicate issue maybe, but some of the concerns can be also that a lot of the messages come from the north to the south. And there needs to be maybe more equality in this exchange of messaging, so that it's shared equally and that all voices and all concerns are equally heard. I'd love to hear if anybody has anything else to add to that among the audience, or if anybody wanted to ask any questions. Anybody?
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very interesting debate. I mean, this is, in the morning I took part in a debate with UNICEF about the children and youth. So this is a perfect closure of the day, listening to you. A couple of points perhaps. One on the North-South issue. I mean, I took part yesterday in the African Adaptation Summit. The messages are loud and clear from Africa, from the South. I'm not sure they arrive, but they're loud and clear. So I was listening yesterday, I don't know, to 10 African leaders, and I think it clear on both levels what the countries are suffering because of climate change and the need to help them to overcome that and the need to get more finances from the north. So I think I wouldn't worry too much about that. What I worry about is the bigger picture of how messages can be transported to the decision makers. And this is not only on this issue, this is on many other issues too. How can civil society take part in this decision-making process? How can the voices be heard? I mean, one classic way would be elections, obviously, and we have just seen Brazil, I think, where the issue of climate change and the deforestation was heard very loud and clear, and was transformed or translated into a political decision, change of the president. That's one. Everything else, I think we have been struggling with for many, many years. How can, I mean, you said it quite clearly. That is the intelligence is there, the knowledge is there. We know what to do. How can we get people to do it? And I think there we need we need civil society organizations, and I think what you have been doing with various activities and many other things, I think is hopefully having an impact. I'm a bit doubtful about the 20% of EBU broadcasting on environment, because it goes in the direction of what you said earlier, that there is an overflow. I mean, there is too much information on this, and people shut down. I mean, it's interesting. When you look at the course of the year, when do we talk about environment? COP, 2 weeks per year. Maybe we should roll this out and do it more systematically and throughout the year as well, but in a way that it arrives as a message, not that people then shut down and don't want to hear about it anymore. So just a few thoughts. And thank you very much for coming to the Mediterranean Pavilion. I mean, I'm not the owner of this pavilion, but I'm the co-chair of the UFM, so thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your very actually interesting comment, opening also a few perspectives. Did anybody want to react to that on the panel? Jump on it, Vidi.
So, I mean, you're right. If it was literally reportage or the I think we have to, this question around storytelling around the climate, it is not one thing we're talking about. We're talking about a multitude of creative expression. And I can't stress enough, you know, we're in a situation right now, and you know, verbatim I hear this from the filmmakers that we support. They go into someone like the BBC or to Netflix, and literally they will be told, look, we're not buying into another climate change film or another environment film. They don't rate, and anyway, we did that last year. This is not acceptable. In the end, politics follows culture. We are not activating people with the right information, with the right storytelling. And frankly, if our broadcasters and our streaming partners are not getting the message, well, they need a little bit of encouragement. So actually, we have market failure around climate communications. And what we definitely know is strategic comms isn't working. It's not sufficient. And so actually, I think we have to try something different. And maybe I'm a little hard on the 20%. Maybe I'll negotiate you down to 15. But you get the point. You know, we have a choice, and it's a mechanism. It's a mass mechanism that we could switch on or off.
I have to admit, I'm with Bidi on this. I mean, you will ask for 20 and see. but I do think that it's extremely important, because at the end of the day, it's not about, as you say, you know, a story about climate change. It's about how this affects all of us as human beings, and I think that's maybe the message that needs to. Because then it won't be I'm begging somebody to take my story on climate change. It's here's a story that includes the effects of climate change on your life, my neighbor's life, human beings who live everywhere, different communities that are important to us, that can make a difference in our daily lives. And there is a switch that needs to happen somehow. Maybe it's the type of storytelling as well. There is maybe media fatigue, but I think what I love about what you're doing at Doc Society is that they're looking at film, and not only just the storytelling, which is the content of the film, of course very important, but even how the film is produced in a green way, I mean, from top to bottom. So I think these are very interesting elements. But Neringa, please.
If I could just add to this very exciting discussion on the global north versus global south narratives, I think the narrative from the global south is very clear. But currently, the way financial system is set up, and I'm seeing this as a development cooperation student, it is sort of to sustain inequalities. We know that the Bretton Woods institutions, namely the World Bank and the IMF, have been created with the interest of the global north in mind, and often the loans that they give or the conditions, the policies we sort of enforce on the countries of the global south are usually not to benefit them, but to allow us to, have a good trade relations and benefit the global north. So, but I see some positive developments here, maybe a bit provocative, but I feel that with the increasing influence of China in Africa, Europe has been doing better in trying to have more equal and more mutual partnerships, because we have some competition here, so I hope that Europe kind of continues on this path, and the relationship is not that of exploitation or one the coordinator and one that who listens, but there's more equal partnership and cooperation based.
Thank you.
Just regarding the social issues regarding the south and the north, I'm coming from the south, Egypt. So building this kind of thing, somehow. So building this kind of thing, like, okay, the South have to say to the North, not the other way. I really criticize that way of thinking or talking. It should be built in cooperation, not competition. Who is competing? Who to tell who? Like, that's the way that I'm really, against even that. I've been hearing this a lot. It's about the global. I do agree and echo your words about. Sorry, Fly. Echo your words. She's insisting about it's shaped on the global north. But now there are a sort of solutions that are trying to, to build the cooperations, like what happening in the Anna Lindh Foundation or other institutions. So I think that it's very important to start from, the cooperation side and to take the further steps, even the upcoming 5 or 10 years plan. So I want to reject that even to my fellow Africans, that it's not really the right thing to use, as we have to say to the north then, back and forth.
Thank you, Ahmed. And I think actually definitely that's, again, where intercultural dialogue is so valuable. And that's where organizations like the Anna Lindh, are here and saying, please use us and please have faith in the power of that kind of dialogue to really bring everybody together around a table to discuss these issues. We're more than happy to do that. Did anybody else want to say something, or can we?
May I ask?
Yes, please.
All of you. Up to now, we discussed what corporations can do, what governments can do, and also what the media and storytelling. I would like to ask something much more personal. All of us, and I put myself here too, we are consumers. We make thousands of decisions daily, and we are pretty aware about the climate. How good are we? How are our habits? Because we want to change other people's habits. We want to make people save water. Do we really wash the dishes and let it run? Do we travel and buy the bottle that it is plastic? Do we demand? Do we ask for things as consumers? And I think there we talk a lot, but we are habitual beings, and we end up also catching ourselves going for the easy solution. I mean, yesterday I had a fantastic, wonderful mango ice cream. And I asked, where has the mango here come from? Only to be told that it was flown from Paris. So, do you understand? I mean, I lived for 2.5 years in the most magnificent country that has, I don't know how many types of mangoes. Why? And I'm just trying to present this, that even the people who know don't necessarily always are wise enough to ask for what is needed to be done. And there maybe we can start also with that. I mean, before we go to rural areas and want to transform them totally. A thought.
Anybody else? That's a fantastic example, but actually not a rare one. You're from Greece, I'm from Jordan. We have the most amazing production of oregano, but when I look for oregano oil, I have to get the Greek one. So
Mainly from Kenya, I think.
also maybe it's Kenya, Greece, I don't know. But maybe that also comes back to systems that you were mentioning, and there are systems that need to be a bit revisited. But again, that can be done through dialogue and through conversations, because there are systems that are put in place that means that sometimes it is cheaper to do that than to produce, or that these are agreements that have been done that are really difficult to change or to break, again, or that would be costly to sometimes. So I'm not saying it's the case of everything. I love the idea of all of us having a bit of a conscience exam and looking at what we do initially and learning from, I actually, before I did this, I had a chat with my son who's 15 years old. I've been working on this. I don't know if I've been working on this for quite a while, because it's something I'm learning more about climate change. I'm usually a reporter, but not specialized in climate change as you are, Rosalind. In 5 minutes, my son told me all the points that I've been researching for the past 10 days. So there is a lot of, there's a lot of power to that. But yes, so he definitely is careful and knows how to, and is much more aware. But as consumers, there's definitely things that we need to work on. Did anybody want to react to that? And then we're just gonna have a final round, unless anybody else wants to ask a question or react to what we're talking about. Yeah. Oh. Then we'll take all questions at the same time, yeah?
Yeah. Thank you very much. My name is Damilola Oguntade. I represent here the Africa Europe Foundation as a youth delegate, and I'm currently based in Hamburg because I do a master's in international law, which is specialized in sustainability governance. So I just want to make a very quick comment based on what Neringa said and how the global system has been arranged. But I'll start with this very quickly. The term Global South, how did we come about this term, right? It's just like when you name a child, right? A child doesn't participate or doesn't take part in the process of the name which he or she is given, right? And in my culture, the name you're given says a lot about you, right? Apart from the fact that it's very necessary to name certain countries, it also tells about the prospect of their development in the future. And this is where the importance of narratives come in, right? How do people from the so-called Global South now, in the past they were called third world countries, developing countries, and least developed countries. Maybe Global South is more neutral. And this goes back to the, sort of inequality that Neringa pointed to, and the fact that even the global economic governance institutions are headquartered in certain regions of the world. And so how do we decentralize this? And this is where narratives come in, and this is where, the dialogue also comes in, because otherwise we continue to have this form of inequality, of bargaining powers between the global south and the global north. So I think emerging leaders from the global south, so to say, we're taking up this narrative to redefine how this has been. And I think I just wanted to make this comment, and this uproots a lot of arguments, but this is my view, very critical view about it, and open to listen to your comment on it.
Very, very interesting comment. Thank you for sharing that. So we have we can react on two questions: the consumer, what do we do? And also this really interesting way of looking at, this balance that we're trying to find between the global south in terms of who has the negotiating power, and how we bring everybody to the table to sort of, through dialogue, through intercultural dialogue and narratives, bring our views to be more shared views and visions of our future, our common future. Please, does anybody want to go first?
So, Your Highness, I mentioned the Green Innovation Hub, or the Green, intercultural dialogue. And I think it's very important to add those ideas, because decentralization, as you mentioned, it's the very important key to start this. And I found out that most of the, the talks, even the last COPs, is always about what I've mentioned before. But this year, and as Egypt have a very big role and have a very big importance on representing Africa and other, countries who should be in the same region. So what I think about decentralization is putting a one unified vision based on this, on how to cooperate and to have a sort of, the same, what we call it, like the heaviness, or like, for example, though Nigeria is there, Egypt is there, and other countries are there, and they just have equal, contribution to everything, even in for example, in the loss and damage or adaptation mitigation files. We need to be working together, but we need to have that kind of presence. We should, impose rules that can, unify and decentralize that power that we are talking about. So what I see is also it's a big job, and it's a big, great job for the UNFCCC, for example, or other, UN bodies to identify the mechanism to do so. Also the media, because I think the media is always talking about climate change, but what about this part? It's a very vital part to work on, and I really admire your comment.
Thank you. We have time for one quick comment, and then we have to wrap. Anybody else want to say something? Neringa.
Just, well, firstly, on your question on the self-sustainability, I was the lead researcher for the study of the EU Council of Europe Youth Partnership on greening the youth sector, and we made 81-point checklist on how to act sustainable and doing training for youth organizations on that. But I always start the presentations by saying that so I think it's like 100 state-owned and corporate companies account for 75 of carbon emissions. So when we speak about ourselves, our fellow young persons, it's important to know that, it's not only on youth or us or civic society organizations to fix that. It's the big polluters which we need to keep accountable through government intervention as well. And regarding the intervention, regarding the term of Global South, actually my university has recently adopted a new term. It's the global majority. So now if anyone is interested actually to apply at SOAS University of London, there's scholarships for the global majority, which is, I guess, trying to redefine and up the term game. And when it comes to the financial institutions and headquarters, I think what's interesting is that often the policies they have prescribed have not worked. The whole neoliberal asking, do this, do that, and then we see there's a flop, and they do not recognize it. They say, oh, you haven't met some requirement for good governance, you have not done this or that. So I think, well, we need to either reform them, or if not, we need to look for alternatives. That's the only bargaining power to have. And a few concepts which I think need to be discussed could be a debt write-off and reparations.
Thank you so much. We're going to have to leave it here. I'd like to thank everybody for this, which I thought it was a very exciting discussion, that if I had more time, I'd love to pursue more, and hopefully we can individually or bilaterally. I thank you all for participating. And if I may, again, going back to your point, there's in the Green Village, you may have seen this tree where people are hanging what they are going to do, their promise, what they are going to do to counter climate change, or at least personal actions. So that goes back to your point, and I'd just like to point to that. Thank you all very, very much. This was really interesting.
Thank you very
Goodbye. Photo picture, please, sorry, before everybody goes.